Welcome, my friend, to the On the Blue Line podcast with Wayne Mulder, and I am your host, Wayne Mulder. This is a law enforcement podcast where we discuss topics that will empower you on and off the job. Maybe you're tired, you're frustrated, feeling overworked, struggling to balance work and home demands, or simply you just need some encouragement. Well, if so, you've come to the right place. Be sure to listen all the way to the end of today's podcast in order to learn the one thing you wouldn't expect to know about Navy search and rescue swimmers. Then you're going to learn one of the main reasons military and law enforcement marriages can fail. Our guest is going to tell us the one thing he misses the most from his time in the Navy. And lastly, the most important thing you can do to break out of what he calls the middle class mold. If you're watching this rather than listening to it, then you can see that snow has fallen in the studio. Pretty impressive for a Florida studio. Just so you know, if this is first time listening to us, we have two weekly podcasts. This is the interview room. In here, this releases every week on Thursdays at 0500, and I sit down with guests from all walks of life, not only in law enforcement, just like this week's guest, but people who can offer us something beneficial for our personal and professional lives. The other podcast comes out on Monday mornings at 0500, and it's called Morning Roll Call. It's a weekly monologue show, and in there, you and I, we sit down and we just discuss news, recent events, law enforcement trends, and a variety of other topics that gives you something to think about as you begin your week. Both shows are available on most podcast platforms. They're also available in video on YouTube and Rumble. And then the easy way to see everything that we're up to is to just go to On the Blue Line, ontheblueline.com. Let's go ahead without taking more time. Let me tell you about this week's guest. It's Nate Riggs. He's the one joining me in the interview room. He's the CEO and owner of the Riggs Group, a highly successful real estate team. He specializes in residential listings and has a passion for educating younger generations on the benefits of home ownership and the pitfalls of consumer debt. I think we can all agree for the times we're going into that it's not just the younger people that are struggling right now, it's all of us. So there's some lessons we can all learn. Although real estate has always been his passion, he spent time in the U.S. Navy as an aviation search and rescue swimmer. His experiences include real estate, life as a naval aviator, career transition, and raising a family all at the same time. And we get heavily into that balance and everything that he was going through. Nate is on a mission to break the middle class mold, as he calls it, and to create generational wealth and a lasting legacy. There's so many important lessons that we can learn from Nate. So without taking any more time, let's get to this week's guest, Nate Riggs. Well, Nate, welcome to the show.
Hey, Wayne, thanks for letting me be on it.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this. Like I told you offline, I really don't know a lot about you. So this is a perfect environment to sit down. I have a cup of coffee here and we can just get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah, likewise. I skipped coffee this morning and went straight for the Rockstar at the gas station on my drive in. So
there's nothing wrong with that. But that does lead to the first question.
Yeah.
Is it coffee or tea?
It's coffee. A lot of coffee.
All right. Has any particular type of coffee? Are you like a black coffee guy, or are you got to throw a little cream and sugar in there? Or?
Yeah. So generally black coffee, like if I'm just drinking out of the Keurig or at home, it's just black coffee. But if I stop at a coffee shop, I just get a latte with no flavor. So it's still, even then it's like steamed milk mixed in with it. Pretty much. That's it. Yeah, that's how I like it. At one point I did get a minor coffee addiction during my search and rescue days. I thought that if I drank enough water, it would balance out the amount of coffee. That was not true. And it ended up like my wife had to take me to the ER to get bag IVs to get rehydrated. So, coffee, just normal.
It can do that to you for sure. Do you have a best or worst travel story, Nate?
Best or worst travel story? So the worst best. I guess they kind of go hand in hand, right? Because you like to tell them. So that's what makes it a good story. But the experience in the moment was not a good experience. When I was young, going back to the search and rescue years too, this was my first time, big time out of the country. And I'm here in Florida and it's sunny and it's hot in February, like normal. And they're like, hey, you're going to meet a ship in Djibouti. And I'm like 20 something years old. They're like, you're going to Djibouti. And I'm like looking up Djibouti, and like on the map, it's right next to Mogadishu or whatever, you know, or like Black Hawk Down stuff. You're like, this is great. It should be fine. And it's hot. So I'm like, no big deal. So I set off and like a jeans and a t-shirt. Well, the first leg of the flight takes us to Frankfurt, Germany, which we have like, it's a 13-hour flight and then a 13-hour layover. So now I got 13 hours in Frankfurt, and we're like, let's go outside. There's ice in the streets. I'm like, who would have thought? All I brought was a t-shirt. So I'm like, So I spent my 13 hours like shopping for jackets and stuff. And then from there had another 13-hour flight to like Ethiopia. And so we landed there, and then like those were like big jets, right? Because those are big flights. And then we just kept hopping on smaller airports, smaller plane, smaller airport, smaller plane. And so, and you know, nobody told me like to bring extra socks because this is over. Like you think you're just flying, you know, I'm used to flying from Florida to Texas.
Right.
So now I'm flying across the world, and I didn't realize it was like a 2.5 day event, you know, same clothes. So, and then this is the best. We get to eat, get there to Djibouti, and you know, nobody, like they just send you, they're like, here's your ticket, go. So it was me and one other dude, and I'm like, who are we meeting here? I have no idea. And I'm serious, like go watch like Black Hawk Down. It's the same type of town where you land. You're like, I'm wearing like an American Fighter shirt, because remember that stuff was like popular back then.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, I stick out like crazy. This guy literally, I say, steals our luggage. He picks up the luggage and runs with it, and he runs like, you know, 10 feet and then puts them down. And then they're putting out their hand, right? Because they did you a favor, and you're like, man, I didn't have any other money besides like 20s on me or something, because I'm like traveling. So I just grabbed 20s. So I give the guy 20 because I don't want to start an international incident or something by stiffing this guy, which is tons of money.
Right.
Finally, the guy who's supposed to pick us up shows up, and he's like, oh, hey. And I'm like, dude, where were you? Like, we've been waiting. Our luggage got robbed. I got robbed. He's like, how much did you give him? I'm like, $20. He's like, dude, you could have given him like a quarter and it would have been fine. And I'm like, bro, you were not here. So that's probably the worst, best travel. And then, you know, we got on the bus and rode into, and then it's funny because you go there and then you go past like the gates where it's like Humvees and machine guns to get in. And I'm like, I was just out there. Like nobody was there to pick us up. We landed, have no clue what we're doing on the streets. You're like, yeah. So,
and now I'm going to be in the secure facility.
Yeah. So that was it, man. Early 20s travel story, probably.
That's awesome. Do you have a favorite modern nonfiction book?
Favorite modern nonfiction book. So these are books that tell the truth, right?
Essentially,
I always get those mixed up, nonfiction or fiction.
And it can be a favorite fiction story if you have one, but I always ask the nonfiction because usually there's some life lessons in there that the listeners could enjoy.
Oh, man. The Almanac of Naval Ravikant.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it's an easy read. It's I keep my best. So I have an old record player that was like part of an inheritance that came to me, and I keep like my best books up there. So it's in my bedroom. The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. It's kind of like some of his life lessons. I don't want to say it's in the like self-help category, but it's kind of more of that like, hey, live your life this way. Yeah. Or here's a story of my life. And so simple things in there. Like one of the big takeaways is he talks about how one of the most controversial things in his family is like he'll get in arguments, and he sees value in his time. So as a business person, outsourcing and finding out, you know, what my skill sets are and what I'm better off paying someone else to do so that I can just focus on mine. Like he won't even pick up laundry at the dry cleaners. He's like, no, I'm like, and he gets in an argument with like his mom about it. Cause he's like, I'm worth more money hourly. My hourly rate is higher than picking up laundry. I'm better off paying someone to go to the laundromat to pick up my clothes, and I'll go keep focusing on what I'm good at, right? You know, to like just basically have a better quality of life. So I read that at the beginning of the year. Green Lights is another good book, Matthew McConaughey. That's good on audio. So if I had those two, yeah, perfect. I got some books behind me here, but.
Yeah, well, there's nothing like a good book. That's why I asked the question. I'm always fascinated on the different answers I get. And what's interesting is I rarely get the same answers. Like everybody has a different book that speaks to them, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, it is cool. You know what's interesting when you start reading books? Most of the people who write books, they quote or mention other books. So you can kind of go down these trails of like, I try to make notes, I'm reading and like, okay, that book, I'll order that one next and try it. I don't know.
Yeah. I do that with books, and I do it a lot with podcasts. It's amazing how many different podcasts out there always referencing different books. So my book list is probably far greater than I'll ever get through. And most of it is from listening to different podcasts and so forth.
Yeah.
What is that place that brings you the most peace? Like that favorite spot where you just kind of stop and breathe and enjoy life?
Oh man, my favorite spot, it's got to be on the water or under it. If I'm out in the water, and it could be in the swamp, or it could be at the beach, or it could be, down somewhere like the Florida Keys or Bahamas style water, but probably the river, like the swamp, the river. If you get out there and it's like, if you take a boat out and you shut down the motor, or if your motor breaks and you're stuck out there, like normally happens. I mean, I think that's the best place to be.
Yeah. It's amazing the quiet and so forth too, especially if you get out in some of these larger swamps.
Yeah.
That dovetails nicely into the question that I was going to ask, kind of like your origin story. It's my understanding you pretty much grew up in the state of Florida. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about your beginnings?
Yeah, so I was born in a small town called Sebastian, Florida. Sebastian's on the east coast of Florida. It is known for its surfing and then kind of like a little fish town. I think to this day, they say the population is only like 6,000. So small town. Grew up there, and, we had a small flower shop there. And then my grandpa, who was actually kind of just my grandma's boyfriend at the time, he had the Sportsman Marina and Lodge. He came back from World War II. He started the Sportsman Marina and Lodge. So he was all about that life. So that's kind of where I didn't go to a formal daycare. I went to like Grandpa Orvis's John boat, and like we went fishing every day. Awesome. So that was part of my grow up. We moved a little bit further north to Titusville, which was in the Space Coast, right? So right across. So then all the space shuttle launches, I got to experience that. And then by the time I was in high school, we moved to the Tampa St. Pete time. And that's when I first started teaching swimming lessons and being a lifeguard and kind of going, it just progressed. When I talk about the water in my life, it's like, it's always been there. And so it's one place where I'm really comfortable. And then all the way through, left high school, went to University of North Florida in Jacksonville for real estate marketing. Was pretty young to get into something like that, where you're talking about, big financial numbers and responsibilities. And so I kind of knew I needed to grow up a little bit in order to really be a valuable asset to somebody in that arena. And so that's what led me to joining the Navy for, I never tended to do it for a career. I was like, I'm going to do this to get some life under my belt, basically. And so the natural progression there was you combine all those things I just talked about, your aviation, space, and water, and led me to the helicopter search and rescue world.
Very cool. So when you say you love the water, I'm assuming all of from scuba to surfing to fishing. Do you have any favorites?
Yeah, so I own a surfboard, used to surf a lot, but as you get older and you have kids, and then, it's a little bit different. So I never actually got into scuba. Most of it was like surface world stuff, a lot of snorkeling. I do like snorkeling. I don't hold any like breath holding records or anything, but I'm pretty comfortable to get down into a reef and kind of check it out for, maybe a minute or something before having to come back up. So never got into scuba. I think just like time and money, you kind of, as you progress through life, you have to kind of decide which hobbies, skill sets, activities you're going to hone in on.
Yeah.
And put your time and money into. So.
Very cool. Do you have a favorite trip where you've gone and done the snorkeling? And
favorite, I did go snorkeling in Belize. Wow. That was pretty cool. That was went on like a cruise ship, and I think it's supposed to be like one of the top places. Of course, as you get older, your memory kind of fades. So the most recent times were down in just like Key West, man. Just going out on the little day charters, and you got to be careful though, because most of those come with like complimentary drinks or whatever. So, and then you're like out in the sun, you're snorting. So like your afternoon can be rough if you don't pay attention to what you're doing. But
I had a rough bout with dehydration in the Keys, and alcohol wasn't even involved. So I understand completely.
Yeah. So if you mix a little bit, but my wife, Shauna, and me, we went down there. That's probably the most recent time. And so that was, that was great fun.
Awesome. What led you to want to go into the Navy, and what was that? How many years were you in?
Okay. So I was in the Navy for 10 years.
Wow.
What kind of made me go? So like, I've always been relatively patriotic as well. And so when the time came for me to go in, like I graduated high school in 2006. So like probably like height of like the Iraq and everything. And yeah. I was like pretty prepared to just like go in the Marines and like go there. Like that's where I wanted to go. I just wanted to go there. I guess I didn't want to go there bad enough that I didn't go to college. I didn't really know. So to back up, my family doesn't really have any experience outside of like World War II, which is a totally different world. My dad, my other grandpa, nobody was really like a career or military. So I didn't have like any figures to influence me or suggest. And so I didn't really understand it. And I think because I had set up appointments for like ASVABs with like the Army and other groups. So I had those conversations. I just didn't really like feel comfortable enough to know what I was getting myself into. So I went to school instead. I think those few years I got a little bit smarter and wiser. And then by the time I revisited the idea, I think at the time the Navy was like jumpstart your career. And that's what I was like more interested in at that point. But this was like 2009. So I was kind of more interested in like, how can I like grow and learn and build skill sets that will help me all throughout life versus just like sign up for the first job. So I looked at their Navy's special programs, and Aviation Rescue Swimmer was on there as one of their, kind of, you got a bonus. It was instead of doing a 4-year commitment, you have to do a 6-year commitment because the first 2 years are schools alone, where most people go to boot camp and get spit out to the fleet and they just are doing whatever. I was going to do these 2 years of school and then enter the fleet. Like, you get some push button ranking or whatever they call it. And then you get bonuses. So I was like, yeah, that's for me. Although I will say I've learned, I think I knew this, like I still didn't trust the system to where I was like, I signed up for this job, but I got a feeling that right after boot camp, they're going to send me to the fleet, but It paid off. It actually panned out. As long as you complete all the training, then you're there.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What's something about the search and rescue world in the Navy that people wouldn't know about? Like what's something that you could tell them about that they wouldn't expect? Like, because people's ideas of all these careers, whether we're talking law enforcement, whether we're talking the military, where we're talking search and rescue, swimming, it all it's influenced by Hollywood, right? Yeah. That's really most people's that, unless, like you said, there's someone in the family who's done it previously. So what's something that maybe people wouldn't expect?
Yeah, the mundaneness, right? So
there's that, yes.
Monotonous. Wouldn't expect. So the Navy search and rescue program is different from Coast Guard in a sense that ours is built around like downed aviators and, foreign wars or relations, where back here, you really get like Coast Guard, like even here flying on the coast, we flew all the time on the coast. Most of it was for training hours. And if there were actual like search and rescue calls, even here in Jacksonville, there might be a search and rescue call like in the Atlantic Ocean, and Coast Guard Station Clearwater would take that call and fly over and run those things versus us taking them, because our like area of responsibility just wasn't there. Now there were a couple instances here where, a plane went down and our helicopters were in flight like 5 minutes away. Then like those guys jump on top of that. So that panned out. The other thing is multi-role. So your Navy helicopter is multi-role. So you sign up and you're thinking, okay, I'm a search and rescue swimmer, and you graduate rescue swimmer school and you're like, sweet. And then they're like, okay, you're going to this A school. And you're like, all right, okay, cool. What is this? And then they're like, oceanography. And you're like, oceanography, what is this? And they're like, actually, your helicopter is also equipped with sonar and you're going to do anti-submarine warfare. And you're like, whoa, okay. So now you're learning anti-submarine warfare. And then we had radar. So we ran surface. And then we were also door gunners. So we had 7.62 and 50 cal machine gun on the door. Now, the cool thing about that is you're multi-role. So you're kind of like jack of all trades, master at none. However, throughout your time, guys tend to kind of branch off. So some guys have like a real passion for the search and rescue side. So that becomes their like identity. Other guys are real geeks and they're into like radar and the submarine stuff. And then like the guns. So the guns became my thing. So I volunteered to go get extra qualifications on the guns, ended up being a helicopter door gunner instructor. And you know what I mean? So I kind of like went down that path. I kind of like just abandoned the other. I was good at the other stuff, but my like focus and what I cared about was, you know, being a door gunner instructor. So
very cool.
That's probably something most people probably wouldn't, you know, see.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I love how you started it because it's so true. I say it a lot with law enforcement that it's hours of boredom with moments of terrifying excitement. And that is essentially the same. People see the lights and sirens and, you know, the police chases on TV. And yet the reality of it is writing reports and explaining why you did what you did for hours.
And taking on your like, oh, and then not to mention to, you know, to keep it simple, to level up, you've got to take on those, what do they call them? Not extracurricular, but we call them collateral jobs. So you had to take on like, oh, they're like at the squadron, there was like, for example, they call it MWR, but basically you had like a snack shop at the squadron. And what you would have to do would like volunteer to like be on the board for running the snack shop so that was a bullet point on your like eval. Like if you could be the best rescue swimmer there was, but if you didn't sign up for all that stuff, you're not going to promote, you're not going to move up the chain, you know, climb the ladder. And so you know, that was something I wasn't very good at either. That was part of not being a career person was like, I'm going to focus on my thing. Forget that.
Exactly. And then they interpret it as you not being a team player and round we go.
Yeah. So
you talk openly about struggles you had with deployments, divorce, debt. Did those struggles come into play during these years in the service, or how did those struggles kind of begin and then lead to the path that you're on now?
Yeah. So really, I did a lot of living in those 10 years. Yeah. So I got married, not super young. I think I was like 26 or something. So not like super young. But yeah, most of the problems were centered around financial problems, which I think sometimes people, they think about infidelity and other things being an issue. I having experienced a lot of different things, you know, without, I guess I'm in a position where I don't necessarily ever want to like point finger or blame or anything, you know, because it's like life happens and you move on. But, you know, when you experience all those, I think financial stuff is the worst because if some sort of infidelity or something happens, and maybe everybody's different, but to me, I'm like, okay, this happened and we can acknowledge it and we can forget, move on or something. But like you rack up a bunch of credit cards for years, month over month, I'm working hard to just send my money to that interest rate, to that debt. And when it's like, so that was more painful to me than anything else. And so, yeah, I was gone on deployment and a lot of that stuff was going on, and that's really hard. So when and I think maybe you take it more personally because you're like, here I am like missing out on the first, like my kid turned 2 days after we went on deployment. So you're like, I'm gone for 8 months. I'm gone for my kid's basically entire second year of life, you know, to be a sole provider out here off the coast of the desert, you know, doing stupid stuff, dangerous stuff. And the money back home is just getting, you know, wasted. And so it's almost like you feel like a dishonor, like it's bigger than just like, oh, I made a mistake with money. And, you know, you come home and you try to work through all that. But sometimes too, I think we know already what the result's going to be in our head, but to keep others happy and to say, well, I did everything I could. You go through all these steps and all you did was like lengthen the problem. And, you know, my thing was like, I guess you can look back and you can be like, yeah, I put a lot of work and effort into that. But, yeah, man, it's a lot. So I try to take it. And so what I do now, being open about it, there's a lot of other people that go through it. There's a lot of dudes that go through it. And so I kind of like, I field a lot of phone calls from other guys that are going through it, man. And I'll say that's because I reached out to guys that I knew went through that. And so I was able to, like, I kind of want to return that favor. There were guys that were like, hey, make sure you're putting the kid first. Make sure, when you're emailing, you don't need to be, don't be mean, don't be hurtful, just be black and white. Here's how things are when you're communicating, handling it, and things, life lessons like that kind of. And so now I'm kind of passing that down to other people that find themselves in that situation.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's super important. And it's true in both careers. I see that as well as another parallel with law enforcement, especially you get these guys. In fact, one of the things we do at a local law enforcement academy is we train on something called Academy Resiliency Training. And as part of that, we talk to them about, hey, don't be the guy that before you even, because you're going to be on probation for a year once you start with an agency. So don't be running out from the moment that you get hired. And you'll see these guys show up with these jacked up 4x4 trucks that cost $100,000. And, right now the prices are insane. And you see them show up in these vehicles or go and buy these houses. You don't even have the surety of a career yet. And you're out spending all this money. And then you see the same thing happen where the stress comes from the job, the stress comes from the relationship. Then you have the added stress of the debt. And then 5 years down the road, 7 years down the road, it seems inevitable that you're going to get divorced. You're going to be miserable. We tell everybody this is the inevitability of this career, but it isn't inevitable. It's the decisions you made on day one that got you there.
I don't know if it's in our personalities, but I almost feel like in those early years too, you live kind of like checklists, and maybe it's part of our training. So much of our training is like by the checklist, so much of that. And it was like, okay, I did my 2 years of school. Check. Okay. Now I got shipped to my first squadron. Check. Now I got an apartment with my roommate. Check. What's next? I need to go find a girl, spend my time with. And you just kind of, it's kind of like cold hearted to think of, but you're like, maybe you do that as a checklist. And maybe that's what leads us into a higher probability of getting ourselves in that situation.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's true, like you said, with the training that comes with the career. And I think males in general, like that's the way a lot of men think, is with a checklist type mindset. So that I think the two of them together, that makes a lot of sense. When you look back, so how did you get out of debt? Did you follow any particular plan? Because you talk a little bit about how you got out of debt. So did you follow any particular plan or anything specific that you did that you would encourage others to consider?
Oh, man. Well, of course, there's get out of debt greats like Dave Ramsey or something. And I don't stand on a Dave Ramsey soapbox because there's lots of things I don't like about him being in real estate, because I'm all about leveraging good debt to make you money as well. But to go back, before you can do that, you've got to have your personal stuff in order. So he's a great guy to start with. I mean, just really cutting back. And what gets tough is, like, I was never one of those people that, you read a lot of that stuff and it's like, well, stop going to Starbucks every morning. And you're like, okay, I don't do that. So how do I save money? Right. It really, you just got to want it, first of all. Another thing is make more money. And I know that's kind of hard. There are a lot of things out there. And I knew guys, even when I was in the Navy, they were like doing Uber Eats on the side while they were in the Navy and different things. And so or guys building furniture in a little bit, but start with like kind of looking inward, being responsible with your own money. If you got cars, get rid of them. I mean, I had a brand new Dodge Charger that then the payment was, I gave it to CarMax. And I had to take like a $13,000 like high interest loan on the balance that we owed. I just had to eat it. But I went from a $608 payment down to a $375. And it took me a few years. It took Shauna and me it basically took 5 years to like chip away. It does take time. And it gets frustrating as you get older and you're like, I just want a boat or I want something cool. Yep. But the trick is just to kind of free up that money and now start putting that money into other things. Then you need to look into like things like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where that's good leveraging. So in that book, he talks about, he wanted, to buy, he wanted a new car, but he didn't want to pay the car payment. So he waited and bought an investment property. And then the money he was making on the investment property, like, say it's $200 a month, is what you're making. Now you go get that car that's a $200 a month payment. You're not paying for it. The tenor, that's general wealth building. Yeah. What's the other book? What's the Burr? I thought I had it here. Oh, rental property investing, The Bigger Pockets.
Yes.
So, you kind of like graduate from like Dave Ramsey and then roll into like, so go from pay your stuff off into the like leverage good debt, you know.
Yeah, I like how you draw that dichotomy between Dave Ramsey and Robert Kiyosaki, because I think if you start with the discipline that Ramsey gives you, like you said, the advice your grandmother would give you, and then you take that discipline and then bring it into the understanding what's a business and what is personal, and really that quadrant mindset that Robert Kiyosaki provides. I love that. That's kind of like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, you kind of got, if you get them in the right order, you know, you can maybe break that. A big thing about me too, which we haven't got into and maybe will, is kind of like breaking that generational cycle, that cyclical cycle, that very either middle class or blue collar cycle where it's like, hey, you know, when I was younger, I stood in a food stamp line with my parents. By the time I graduated high school, we had like a camper and a pool with a hot tub, right? So like my dad had walked that path from nothing to figure it out. But then by the time I got spit out in the world, it was just to start that process over again. So how do we get to where my kids don't start from zero and repeat my life, but start where I left off and continue it?
I definitely want to get to that. In fact, you've got a statement that I want to ask you about that I've got a few follow-up questions on. Let me back up though a little bit because I want the listeners to kind of understand your story. So you get out of the Navy and at some point you start a business. Can you just walk us a little bit through that process into what you're doing now? And then we'll kind of segue into these other questions.
Yeah, sure. So actually 18 months before I got out of the Navy. So by this point I have 2 kids. I'm remarried and I have 2 kids, and I'm an instructor at HSM 40, which is when I first talked about those 2 years of school, there's 5 schools total. It's the last one. It's a whole year almost itself, 9 months to a year. That's where you finally start getting in a helicopter. So you've kind of passed all the other tests. And if you fail out of that school, like, I don't know, it's weird to make it that far. Usually once you get to that part of the program, like you're going to go to the fleet. So I'm an instructor there, but I knew I was getting out. And this is where an added challenge is, because all your boys, all the shop, you really find out who your advocates are and who isn't so much. So because a lot of them take it really personal, unfortunately. Some of them are your biggest cheerleaders. They're excited. Hey, okay, you're getting out of the Navy. We're excited. Anything we can do to help you, we're going to send you on your way. And then others they're frustrated that you're leaving. I don't really know why. Maybe they want to leave themselves, but they don't. I don't know. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about.
A lot of truth to that, Nate.
Yeah. So, but at 18 months, the Navy gives you a form that says, I'm either going to stay or I'm going to leave. So you're covered. You can fake it all you want, but at 18 months, you sign that sheet of paper and you know. So at that point, those collateral jobs, all that extra stuff we talked about before, you might as well quit those and start focusing on the future. So I told them I'm going to be the best instructor in the classroom and in the aircraft. Don't expect to see me. I'm not coming in if I'm not flying. I won't be here. I'm working on my real estate. So I reactivated my license because remember I had got it earlier. So I reactivated it. And that was part of like, you know, if you have a contract job where you're getting a paycheck every week and then you're moving to a sales job, it's going to take time to build that up. So I knew I had to do both. So I was working literally anytime I wasn't in the aircraft, I was out, you know, showing homes, trying to do that. And on the weekends, going full speed. And so basically that's when, you know, the Riggs Group came about. So I partnered, you have to put your real estate license with a brokerage. So partnered with Keller Williams. They kind of had they cost the least amount of money and they give you the most amount of stuff at the same time. So it makes really sense. They have good culture. Gary Keller, he's a great leader. He's all about back to the financial stuff, lead with profit, you know, not starting a business, not taking out a big business loan, but just kind of slowly building, chipping away. So to this day, my business, the Riggs Group, we still are relatively debt free. We use Amex and stuff for travel and points and that kind of thing. But I never took out like a $50,000 business loan. I don't buy leads. It's all relatively organic growth over the years, which I think is important because especially now as we shift from a seller's market to a buyer's market, and that shift period is pretty intense for people. You see a lot of agents kind of freaking out, and they're freaking out because they have thousands of dollars a month to these lead services, but they're not getting any leads right now, where I don't pay those lead services. So I have money in the bank and I'm not worried about it. But building the business, man, I think the biggest thing is consistency. just doing it consistently, a lot of social media growth, a lot of phone calls being made. And I think there's another book called Start Ugly. I never read it, but I know about it. And so the premise of that book is like, if you sit around and try to get everything in order, everything perfect before you start, you'll never get started. You'll never pick up speed. So I just kind of was like, it's a little bit of studying the greats and duplicating what they do. If somebody else already did something successfully, then don't waste your brain space being creative. Just kind of duplicate what they do, but make it your own. Right. Yeah. So a lot of that. Now we're up to, it's not a huge number either, but there's a couple in real estate. There's a couple sweet spots. It's not necessarily that you want to do hundreds of units, which is homes, like transactions, hundreds of transactions a year, because in order to support 100 plus transactions a year, you're going to have staff and team members and all kinds of people. Where like right now I'm floating around like 25 transactions a year. But remember, I left the Navy January 2020. So we're 2 years. So 2021 and 2022, 2021, we did 25 units. And then this year we're up. When I look at the numbers, we're up 37.5% year over year. So You would think we would do more than 25, but some of that is volume, not units. So we didn't necessarily do more units, but we did a higher price point. Which makes sense also because the whole market went up, right? So kind of goes hand in hand. I use a showing agent. And there's different splits there. And then I use outsource, like a transaction coordinator, does all the paperwork. Remember going back to Naval Ravikant, I am terrible. Like I have my MacBook and Anna does all the paper. Like I'm great at the phone calls and the face-to-face and doing this right here, meeting and talking and teaching. And I literally take my MacBook to Anna and I give her it and I'm like, can you go through my emails and forward yourself the important stuff? Like, I mean, it's that like, I don't even forward the emails. I just give her she logs into my email and forwards them to herself. So, yeah. And that's what keeps me efficient, man.
That's awesome. Very cool. That's a hell of a year to have had started a company. It was January of 2020.
So that's what was crazy too, because I got my license the first time, remember, in like 2007. That's what happened. I went to college and I've quit college twice now, by the way. So I quit. So I went to college in 2006 and then found out you don't need a college degree to get your real estate license. So I quit college and just got my license. And then of course, all that was the biggest housing recession ever. And so that was part of, I still lived at home with mom and dad. I didn't really have any skill sets. I'm trying to convince people that like this squirrely headed like beach kid is trustworthy with your home during the worst. It's just not going to happen. That's how I ended up in the Navy. And then of course I leave the Navy in January 2020 and 2 months later is the COVID thing. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, man. Like
it's almost like the universe wanted to give you a challenge every time you were going to do this.
And it's exhausting, but you know what? I like it. And you're right. Like at this point in life now at 20 years old and you live with mom and dad, how bad do you really want something when you're 30 years old and you've got 2 kids and a wife and you own a house and you do have a car payment and you're trying to pay off your divorce debt still? I mean, you want it bad. So you're going to make those calls. You're going to do the work. And along the way, the skill set is built. So as long as if you're starting some sort of business or this is the business starting plug. If you're starting a business, the most important thing is just to be consistent every day. Don't worry about your skill sets. You're going to fail. You're going to make mistakes, but you're going to, there's all kinds of slogans. You're going to fail forward, all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And so as long as you're being consistent and doing it every day, you will get better and better every day. Your network will grow, your client base, your friends, and it'll all come. And then you'll look back and then everybody's like, oh, he's an overnight success. And you're like, yeah, you didn't see the last 5 years.
Exactly. That's what I keep saying when I think about what I've got going on here as well. It's jokingly, because you look at these numbers and stuff and you're like, yeah, this is an interesting world to try to build something in, because this is what I want to do full time. Like I love what I'm doing for my actual career, but obviously I'm trying to build something here that's going to become my actual career.
That's
And
awesome.
I've had that same thought with, at some point here, if at any point it blows up, which is what happens in this online environment, then in that moment, it's going to feel like an overnight success, and no one's going to have seen. I started this in 2019, so no one's going to have seen the 3 years or 5 years that you're working full time in law enforcement and doing this on your days off and in between. And
crossing them over. Yeah, absolutely. I understand that.
So out of curiosity, before I switch gears, is the switch? So I also live in the state of Florida, so I've seen what housing prices have done. Plus, I'm in one of the hottest market counties in the state. So out of curiosity, is that switch happening? Are we moving from a seller's to a buyer's market, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I would say we are. And based on inventory alone, so actually on the 10th is when our data comes out, which is tomorrow, month over month. So right now we still only have July data. August data will come out tomorrow, so we'll be able to see that. But when you're looking at it, in the springtime, we had as low as 1,200 homes on the market. That's very low for Jacksonville. And right now we're up to 6,000 homes on the market. So the inventory alone, so before, like without even having to say anything else, supply and demand tells you like, hey, the demand has slowed and those homes are on market. So now we went from, and really we're not to a bad market. We're just to kind of a more normal, healthy market. The weird thing that we're seeing is even though our inventory is up, and this is why I mentioned the August data, because I'm anxious to see, like, it used to be days on market. Like a normal market is a 5 to 7 month supply of homes. Like this is a balanced market, not a seller or buyer, just kind of balanced. Okay. And 5 to 7 months supply of homes. We've been sitting at like a 2 month supply of homes. So heavy seller's market. As inventory goes up, homes are going to sit on the market longer, which is going to raise that. So, and from June to July, we were up like 84%. Days on market, but that still just meant we went from like 24 hours on market to like 2 days on market. So I'm anxious to see if the data has shown that, hey, this actually is increasing and our month supply is going up. And that's based on Northeast Florida's like market analysis report that they put out. So we are seeing that. And so from what I've read, when your market shifts, when you go from a seller's market to a buyer's market, it's usually abrupt. And we saw that in the spring. And it just hit like overnight in 1 week. And it typically takes about a few months to do that shift. It's really fast. Kind of like a golf swing. It starts slow and then it's just like, whoom, gone. Yeah. To go back from a buyer's market to a seller's market, it's like a 3 to 4 year. So it's less gradual. So what happens is inevitably the shift from seller to buyer, because it's so abrupt, the news gets onto it and the media, and they really like sell fear. And so what starts as, and I think this is part of it, what starts as a little bit of like, oh, inventory's up. Then the media pushes that kind of as like a fear set. And then people who were kind of on the edge, they do get afraid and they back out, which leads to even more lower demand, right? You see, it's kind of like they like catalyst itself. So the most important thing that I do is kind of share information and data, and even like interest rates. So interest rates are up like mid fives right now. Well, they've been down at the twos, like 2.75, under 3, which for us, we might not see those again in our lifetime. I don't know. When you look at the data in the long run, the average interest rate over all time is 7.8%. The average in the last 30 years is 5.7%. So we're right at like, we're good interest rates, but if you look at the news, it's like, well, rates are on the rise, and people, it's the doom and gloom,
right?
And then people hear that because they didn't buy a house year over the last 30 years, and they don't have that data. So my job is kind of sharing that information. But I think we're definitely seeing a swing we're definitely shifting from where we were, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's like, oh, I can catch my breath,
right? No, I like how you laid that out, because you are right. There's a lot of fear on both sides of the equation. So no, that's very interesting. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and even from a seller's perspective, it's not necessarily terrible, because I worked with a lot of sellers who were, they had anxiety over putting their house on the market, because if it was sold in 24 hours, where were they going to go? Right. And now, as long as they're understanding now, like, hey, we can put your house on the market and it might take 90 to 120 days to sell versus 24 hours. And that's a huge mental, like since COVID for 2 years. And remember, normally we have a normal cyclical, like a very busy spring and a slow fall. And that's year over year when you look at data as well, year over year. Until COVID, we've just been steady for 2 whole years. And so we finally, leading into this fall, we basically hit the normal cyclical pattern of, hey, it's just like there was the rush before summer, school started, everybody's on pause, and it'll kick back in October, November.
Very interesting. No, I appreciate you sharing that, because I find it interesting, and you hear all these differing thoughts just looking at what's going on across the country in general, just with a lot of the craziness. To that end, let me switch gears here real quick, because I don't want to let you go till I ask you about this. You brought up what you were referring to as breaking the breaking the generational cycle. You've referred to it in some of your writing as the middle class mold. Can you just go into that a little bit? And I find it an interesting question from two sides. Kind of, what does it mean to you? And then how has this definition evolved as well? Because we're kind of seeing a disappearance of the middle class. So I'm kind of curious if it's had an evolution for you as well.
Yeah. So that middle class pattern of, hey, I'm going to teach my kids everything I could teach them, and then I'm going to spit them out into the world, and they're going to have to figure it out. And even in the Navy, I met guys that just openly kind of said that, even about their kids. And I used to kind of I didn't, in the shop, it wasn't necessarily like, I'm not getting into this conversation. But internally, I was like, man, isn't that a shame that that's been what we've been taught to just, I'm going to learn everything I can. Then I'm going to set out on this journey of life alone at zero. And I'm going to teach my kids everything. And then I'm going to send them out at zero. And it doesn't, I think maybe that's a difference between the wealthy and the middle class. And to me, the definition of wealthy isn't just, how much money you have in the bank, but it's like your lifestyle and your family and everything together kind of mix. So I just didn't want to start that. I guess one day I was just sitting on the back porch, and I was like, man, and I kind of touched on it earlier. We went from nothing to like, hey, we live in Florida and we've got a pool in the backyard and all that. And then I was sitting there and I was like, I don't have a pool. And it's been like 16 years since I left home. Now it's been even longer. And you're like, why did my lifestyle have to like go back? And why did I have to make the same mistakes? And why as a society do we just accept that as normal? That like, yeah, you got to make your own mistakes and stuff. Like, well, what if you didn't? And not in a way that everybody gets a trophy way, but what if you were able to like, hey, I'm going to teach my kids enough to pick them up. I think that's why I like the Blue Book, the real estate investor book, because he talks about that himself, where at a certain age, he bought a rental property, like his kid is like 8 years old or something. And he's like, I bought this rental property when my kid was 8 years old. I'm going to pay it off in the next 10 years. But over that 10 years, I'm going to teach my kid how to manage it, how the money works, what it costs, how much it brings in. And then when they're 18, I'm going to gift them this. And at that point, it's their decision to sell it and cash in on it or maintain it as an income. But the lesson was taught, and the child is sent out into the world already having something versus just from zero. Does that kind of make sense? So
it does.
I kind of want to create that same thing. What you were talking about as far as like middle class and maybe disappearing, and we see the gap getting bigger between wealthy and the unwealthy. I think it does have to do with information. I think part of it has to do with things like these podcasts, where the information is so free and readily available to us that more people, maybe like you and me, are taking advantage of them. That, 30 years ago without the internet, would you and I might have been a career Navy guy that never did anything extra, got my retirement, continued to live paycheck to paycheck on my pension. And then my kids set out and I was like, yeah, sign up for the Navy and start over like I did. Yeah. That might happen because maybe the information wasn't as readily. So maybe we see more people, heading towards that gap. And then there's a whole bunch of social things. I think there's a breakdown, from what I see. I think a lot of your social programs, they're better. They may do more of like a carrot on a stick than send people in the right direction. So you may have that lower class just kind of like, you know what I mean? They're going further down that road rather than getting the true help that they need. So I don't, and what is the answer for that? I don't know, because I think each of us, we have to want it. We have to need it. We live in a great country. You know, I've been around the world. We live in a great country where there's all this opportunity. Even like this, you and me are able to do this relatively easy.
Yeah.
To do. And so, I mean, the opportunity is there if you want it.
That's awesome. No, I think that's a good point. And I think that I've had this conversation with some other family members because even with my upbringing and where I grew up and so forth, I mean, we were always struggling growing up and financial, I had a great upbringing. My parents, were together, and I've got, that everything was good, but I've had this conversation with other family members about this cyclical, exactly. You hit the nail on the head, this cyclical nature of, not just decision-making, right? So not just like the debt and so forth, but just not offering those opportunities, like the example you gave with the house and so forth, and then passing that on to the next generation. So I think that's a powerful idea. And obviously, I would term it right now that we kind of have a war on the middle class. In other words, to me, the middle class is kind of pushing the wrong direction. So they're because if you aren't thinking outside the box, and if you aren't developing these ideas, sadly, between inflation and so forth, you're actually losing.
Just getting beat down.
Exactly. You're going the wrong direction fast. So I think this is a great idea. And I love this idea of breaking that cycle and moving out. What would you say is the one part of that is the most important? Would it be mindset? Would it be like, if you were going to take that and give, just one actionable step, what would you say would be the most important part of breaking out of that mold?
Yeah, it would have to be mindset. It would definitely have to be mindset. Because you have to go in order. You can't get your finances in order until you've changed your mindset. You can't be creative on your business until you've got your finances in order. You know what I mean? So like, you have to start at the beginning. And I think changing your mindset, thinking big, believing in yourself and believing it. When I was getting out of the Navy, I go back to that advocate part. There were people who were like, hey, you're really great at this job. You're going to be great at any job that you do. Like, it's going to be awesome. And to this day, they're friends and they hire us. I don't say the word use. A lot of people in our industry are like, use me. And it's like, it's not use me, hire me, because you want the best and I'm going to do a great job for you. Like you deserve, but realistically, I had other guys that when I would call them, and because that was part of it, the calls and everything. Hey, listen, man, I'm getting out of this and I'm transitioning into this. I just wanted to call and let you know, blah, blah, blah. Cause I see value in our relationship, so I'm letting you know. And you wouldn't be, guys, oh, so you think you got it all figured out? Oh, so that's what your plan is. I talked about having employees and having team members and partners, and they're like, oh, so you're going to pay somebody. And you're like, well, yeah, that's how business works. Like,
right. That's how this thing grows.
But to them, it just wasn't fathomable that you could, they had their like 40,000. I think like I left the Navy after 10 years and my take home, I don't know that my take home was even $5,000. It was probably like $4,700 a month or something. And that's with fly pay and search and rescue pay and like hazard pays and all this. So I was getting a lot of incentive pay, and I still was like, I think I was like making $60,000 a year was my like W-2, but my take home was in the $4,000s a month. And that's not a lot of money at all. And I think, talking to those guys, and then you're like, yeah, I'm going to create a job that pays $50,000 a year. They're like, well, it just didn't really make sense. So mindset for sure. And one last one, I remember a guy saying, I remember like a guy coming by and like, he was like tapping on my desk. He was like, you'll never make as much money anywhere else. And in my mind, I was like, well, for one, it's not about money. I don't want to go on an 8-month deployment and miss time with my kids anymore. So I'm not doing that. And for two, that's just wrong. Like, there's a lot of opportunity out there. So, to anybody who feels stuck in their job, like get in the books, get in the stuff, listen to the podcast. And you'll just be kind of enlightened to the amount of opportunity that there actually is. If you want to work hard to get it. I built so here's the difference too. Like, I don't know, in law enforcement, you work weekends and holidays and other stuff. And we did the same too. And we had duty weekends and it sucked. I hated duty weekend. And it was only one weekend a month. You would rotate into like, we're working this weekend. Yeah. And it was the end of the world. I work most weekends now, but I just don't feel the pain because I'm doing something I like and enjoying, And right now during this cyclical slow time, it's weird that I'm like, oh, I'm not working this weekend again. And it's like, it almost feels wrong to not work a weekend now.
Right.
And, I built a calendar for myself, and to get everything done that I actually need to get done, my calendar starts at 48 hours a week before I even take a single appointment. And I know I've got to be taking 2 appointments a week to keep business coming in. So add, those are 2-hour appointments. So add another 4 hours. So my calendar starts at 52 hours a week. Right. It's not a 40-hour work week. So your mindset of, hey, I'm going to have to work more hours and work harder to get this freight train rolling. But as I start out, like, I don't show homes anymore. I have a showing agent. So I've already within 2 years alleviated that. I'm not driving around going all over town. I'm focused more in this office in a behind the scenes role, creating the business, and then I'm sending others out to do that business. So it takes time, but that's all mindset,
Yeah. No, that's great. And it's so encouraging. I know that's going to resonate with a lot of listeners, because just like this career, or just like the military, this career is no different, where there's always those people that are trying to decide, are they going to, depending on when they came in, are they going to push to retirement and then do something, or is there something they can do that can be a transitional job, something like that. So that is powerful, powerful stuff. I got 2 last questions for you. I know we're going
I'll try to keep them short.
Yeah, no. I definitely, importantly, what is next for you and for your mission?
Yeah. So next for me, our level. So we're at a point where we're finally kind of at that back to zero. So we're moving into that investment on ourselves. As far as the income side of things, we're at a point where we need to start investing and giving back more. So looking at different charities, looking at different places to put our money. I also grew up, my dad was a pastor, so I grew up in church. So tithe or giving is always a big part. And we've stuck with that, but we're kind of getting to a point where as you make more money, and if you're giving you're giving more money too. So you're looking at different organizations, different groups, places where you can put it to best work. I wouldn't advise just giving blind, but at the same time, you've got to give from the heart, and kind of, you can't give and then control what you give. But just do the research and really look into the organizations or groups you're going to support or give. And that just doesn't have to be financially. It can be time too. There's all kinds of ways to give your time. So as our schedule opens up, as we're outsourcing some of the business and we're getting more time back in our lives, we're looking for different areas to get plugged in, to give back more.
It's awesome. To whom much is given. So I think that's great. My last question that I ask everybody, which I always tweak a little bit when they're not in the law enforcement career, but there's obviously, we've talked about a lot of great things in this conversation, but what is the one thing, the one takeaway that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
One thing you can do differently. Man, I would probably say you've got to enjoy the journey. And you've got to enjoy the moment. So the jobs that we do they're not always easy, and they're either boring or they're like intense at the same time, like we talked about.
Yep.
And so enjoying that journey, enjoying those moments, I think that's really important, because once you leave that world, whether you retire or whether you leave it, and I will say, like, I don't know what we called it a shop, but like, I still miss the shop. I went from being in a room full of 30 guys and going on missions or training or doing stuff constantly. And now I sit in this room kind of alone. So there's a little bit of like loneliness sometimes. And so enjoy that moment and enjoy where you're at. I think is important.
I love it. What is the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, best way to connect with me is definitely on Instagram, at Nate Riggs Official. It's super easy. We're also on YouTube, at Nate Riggs Official. Made it super. They're the same. So YouTube and Instagram, at Nate Riggs Official. There's vlogs and other things on there, so you'll get to know a little bit more about me as well as the business side. And then we do have a website, which is theriggsgroup.kw.com. It's centered around a home searching, but if you click the About Us, there's a contact. And, you can type in your name, email, phone number, and a short message. That goes right to my email, so I'll for sure see that too.
Awesome. I'll be sure to get all that linked up in the show notes. Nate, this has been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming on.
I enjoyed it. It's been great.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So thank you so much for watching or listening to this week's podcast. Every episode has full show notes with all the links, more pictures, even transcriptions of every episode, and it's at the website at ontheblueline.com/show notes. Or to make it simple, if you just go down to whichever player you are watching this on and click the link right at the top, that will take you directly to the show notes page for every episode. That is all I have for today. Don't forget that I'll see you next Monday in Morning Roll Call. I'll see you next Thursday in the interview room. But in the meantime, I'll see you on the Blue Line.